Since we're nearing the end of July, I thought it was time for another version of my Dynasty spin on Guy Fieri's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives to scour through the ugly parts of Dynasty ADP and find those hidden gems among the muck. So welcome in to episode 4 of Dynasty Fallers, Fill-Ins, and Flyers. First up, we have our faller, who from this time last year up until now has lost about 6 rounds of startup value, and that's new Seahawks tight end Noah Fant. And I get it. He's a former first-round pick who has never had a top 10 season at the position and has now been banished to the Seattle Seahawks with Drew Lock and not Russell Wilson. But I think that's honestly the paradox with Noah Fant right now, because his situation hasn't changed at all. He's still a very athletic tight end. He's still by far the starting tight end on his own team, and his quarterback situation is still just as bad as it was in Denver. His situation did not change, but we've dropped him in dynasty value, I think more so because he didn't get the quarterback upgrade that all the other Broncos now have than because of anything that Noah Fant actually did himself. And we're penalizing him for no reason at all. Just 2 years ago in 2020, Drew Lock was the starter for the Broncos for 13 games. And in that season, Fant had 62 receptions for 673 yards and 3 touchdowns on 93 targets and averaged over 10 PPR points per game in the games with Lock that year, as opposed to the other 3 games that had Driscoll, Ripien, and that one Kendall Hinton game. We know the Seahawks want to run the ball a lot, but this offense is also hyper funneled through only a couple of receivers when they do pass the ball. Obviously, Metcalf and Lockett are going to be the primary guys, but after them, there is no clear-cut third option. Last year, it was actually Gerald Everett who saw the third most targets despite missing 2 games. He was on pace for over 70 targets. Now, that's quite the drop from the 90-plus that Fant has been getting in Denver, but Fant is also a better tight end than Gerald Everett and has a lot more familiarity currently with Locke than anybody else on the team. So him getting to 80 and even maybe closer to 90 shouldn't be all that difficult in Seattle still. The real reason I think Fant is a great target right now is because of his price, which, as I mentioned before, has fallen 6 rounds in startup value to where he's now the tight end 17 in July ADP. And what's even crazier are some of the names that are currently going ahead of him at the tight end position, like Irv Smith, who has a career high 365 receiving yards, Cole Kmet, who I like, but is also in a bad situation and also hasn't really done anything yet. We also have David Njoku, who's really only ranked this high because of Deshaun Watson, and let's just totally disregard his entire career up to this point, right? We also have Fant's former teammate, Albert Okwuegbunam, who I also really like, but keeping with the theme here, hasn't really done anything up to this point either in his career. I'm also not a Dawson Knox guy. I'm also not a Mike Gesicki guy either. So I would probably fade both of them in favor of grabbing Fant later, or just trade down from both and get Fant plus in a trade. Honestly, though, the best part about this is that Fant is cheap enough to where if you already have an Irv Smith or an Albert O or a Mike Gesicki, you could also just go get Fant now. So now you have 2 chances at the tight end position instead of 1. Don't get me wrong, Irv Smith, Albert O, even David Njoku, if Deshaun Watson plays, are all in better situations, on better teams, with better offenses and better quarterbacks. So I don't mind the shots on them hitting either. It's just that Fant has the pedigree, he has the athleticism, the talent, and the opportunity to also be a weekly contributor at mid tight end 2 prices going behind all of those guys. And for Dynasty, he is also only 24 and a half years old. And he's also a free agent after 2023, to where either we're hoping that the Seahawks situation improves by then, or he signs somewhere else that's probably a better situation. To me, that's a tight end worth targeting right now in Dynasty and just playing the long game on. Next up, we have our fill-in, and a player that I've come to believe in more and more since the end of last year, and that's Texans quarterback Davis Mills. And I don't know if it's a good thing or not to say that Mills was actually the second best rookie quarterback last year, but he was. He had the same number of QB1 weeks as Justin Fields and twice as many as Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson. He threw more touchdown passes than every rookie quarterback except Mac Jones, and threw the least amount of interceptions out of that entire group. He threw the most 300-yard games, and he was actually tied with Aaron Rodgers and had 1 fewer than Patrick Mahomes in that same category. He was actually a pretty good quarterback, and that was on basically 0 expectations playing for the Houston Texans. So now, heading into 2022, the Texans did the smart thing. They brought in 0 competition for Mills, and they built elsewhere, allowing them to see if Mills can actually be a thing or not. They still have Brandon Cooks, a second-year Nico Collins, and to say that Philip Dorsett is an upgrade at the wide receiver 3 position is probably not the greatest thing, but it is what it is. They also added Marlon Mack at the running back position, who I still think has something in the tank, but just in case he doesn't, they also drafted Dameon Pierce, who it seems like everyone but myself seems to like. And then they also invested a first-round pick into an offensive lineman, and then you pair that with the Texans' pretty soft schedule on the year, and you have yourself a streamable QB2 currently going at QB3 prices. In fact, deep QB3 prices, because in Superflex July ADP, Mills is the QB 29, and his trade value isn't that far behind, with him being most frequently moved for a second-round pick either this year or in 2023, both of which are deals that I would be making for Mills right now. There is the risk that Mills is just going to be replaced next year, but I think that risk is baked into his current Dynasty price. Even for a one-year rental as a QB3, I'd be willing to pay a second for that, and I would rather go get him than guys like Marcus Mariota, Mitch Trubisky, or Jimmy Garoppolo if you needed a spot starter, because I think Mills has more longevity than all three of those guys, on top of just being a better fantasy producer at the quarterback position. Don't pay a first round. Please do not pay a first round pick, because you don't need to. But any second or a second round value type of player is a move that I'd be doing right now, and better yet, you might not even need to pay that much to go get him. Lastly, we have our flyer, a guy who has gained some training camp hype over the last few days, and that is Bills wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie, because apparently McKenzie has been the initial favorite to be the Bills starting slot receiver, not Jamison Crowder like we originally thought. He got basically all the reps with the first team over Crowder on Monday, and then another interesting tweet from a Bills reporter said that every healthy receiver took reps on special teams except, of course, Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, and then Isaiah McKenzie. Now, maybe you think this is weird, but McKenzie has shown juice in games before and also signed a 2-year, $4.4 million extension this past spring. Crowder only signed a 1-year deal worth $2 million, so essentially, they're both being paid the exact same for 2022, meaning this should really be a talent-only competition. And to tell you the truth, I think McKenzie is better right now than Crowder is in their career. Yes, Crowder has done way more, but McKenzie is 2 years younger, he has 4.4 speed, and is way more dynamic than Crowder ever could be. Everybody seems to hang on to Gabe Davis's 4-touchdown playoff performance last year as a reason to why he'll break out this year with more targets and more opportunity. But what about McKenzie's one game he started last year against the New England Patriots, where he torched them for 11 for 125 and 1 on 12 targets? That was his only game where he got significant snap share, and he thrived in that role. You can also look at Cole Beasley's role in the Bills' offense the last 3 years as the primary slot guy, with 100+ targets every year, 2 seasons with 80 or more receptions, and he finished as a top 40 wide receiver each of those 3 seasons, with 2020 actually being a top 30 wide receiver season at wide receiver 27. I mean, he's basically another Josh Palmer, another Mecole Hardman, KJ Osborne, a wide receiver 3 on a good offense with good or even an elite quarterback, and all 3 of those guys are going way ahead of McKenzie in July ADP. Even guys like KJ Hamler and Paris Campbell and Curtis Samuel are going ahead of Isaiah McKenzie right now. That's how cheap he is. I was actually able to add McKenzie just this week in my main Dynasty league, and that's a league where rosters are 30 players deep. So if he was available for me to pick up just this week from waivers in that league, there's a good chance that he might be available right now on your waiver wire. If he's not, maybe toss a 4th at the manager who has him and see what happens. Maybe you send a 3rd for McKenzie and a 4th, or add him as a final throw-in in a bigger trade that you're already working on. The point here is that he's super cheap, most likely waiver wire cheap, to where this is truly a pure upside flyer type play, where the downside is you just lost a little bit of fab, but the upside is a weekly flex player with perhaps the ultimate peak upside being perhaps this year's Hunter Renfrow. And if you want some more deep sleepers to stash right now in Dynasty, I highly recommend checking out this video right here from the flagship DLF podcast.